Since the beginning of human civilization, the world has grown and changed to get to the point that we are at today. But of all those changes, one thing remains the same: war. War may have evolved from the ancient people using bow and arrows or clubs to the metal armor and swords used during the Crusades, and from there to the muskets and cannons used during the American Revolution, all the way up to the machine guns, tanks, and the use of bombers that we see in the world wars. But even with the evolution, the essential concept of war has stayed the same. Now war has evolved yet again, adding the hydrogen bomb to the mix, giving any country in the world the ability to cause mass destruction with a single push of a button. Even with these evolutions, there is still only one cause of all this bloodshed and war: fear. Fear is the underlying cause of all wars, and is what causes the world we live in to be so unstable and restless. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This rings true even with war. Without the fear of how other nations are different from us, or the fear of terrorism, we would not have wars. But these things are still there, and there continue to be wars. Sarah LaSure defends this ideal in her journal article Causes of Communal War, Fear, and Visibility, when she says fear of culture annihilation or assimilation grows when a group encounters policies that threaten their language, religion, or customs. One of the largest examples of this is from the Cold War. While no battles were ever fought, the Cold War was full of fear amongst the American people. The war would someday break out, and the end of the world would soon follow. This was all caused by another one of America's fears: communism. We were scared that communism would take over the world if we did not stand up to the Soviet Union and prove that we were better than them. This led to the arms race and space race, and eventually the greatest show of our fear of communism, McCarthyism. McCarthyism gets its name from Senator Joe McCarthy, who was one of the front runners of the witch hunt on communists in the United States during the Cold War era. Ellen Strucker explained how this fear was unreasonable and was just hysteria in her journal article McCarthyism, Political Repression, and the Fear of Communism. She talks about how most Soviet spies had been fired before the 50s even began, and that the communist witch hunt was just fear taking over the country. Without this fear of communism, this movement would not happen, and even the Cold War itself would have been almost nothing if this fear had not been there. Communism would continue after the Cold War, and is still a source of fear in most Americans today, as Ronald Reagan showed in his speech, Evil Empire, he gave in 1983, where he goes into detail about how he'd rather have his children die than live to grow up in a communist nation like that of the Soviet Union, which he calls the Evil Empire. Other than that of communism, fear has also made a home with terrorists. Ever since 9/11 has happened, fear of terrorism has been one of the biggest issues in politics and war. The Middle East has been home to many wars in part because of the fear of these terrorists and also the fear of the people there losing their way of life to another group. George W. Bush shows how fear is put at war in a speech he gave 9 days after the 9/11 attacks when he says,
"Great harm has been done to us. We have suffered great loss. And in our grief and anger, we have found our mission and our moment. Freedom and fear are at war. The advance of human freedom, the great achievement of our time and the great hope of every time, now depends on us. Our nation, this generation, will lift a dark threat of violence from our people and our future. We will rally the world to this cause by our efforts, by our courage. We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail."
President Bush said these attacks have put freedom and fear at war. Not the United States, but our ideals of freedom against the fear of losing them that these terrorists represent. This causes a lot of tension between the United States and most of the Middle East that still is there to this day. These tensions led to the recent missile strike against Iran earlier this year that killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, a powerful Iranian commander. According to the New York Times article, for a post-9/11 generation, war isn't new, but fears of another one are, written by Nicholas Bogle-Burrows. He would go on to talk about the fear of an impending war that these actions cause and the fear the younger generation felt about having to be ready to fight for their country in a third world war. While this never happened, tensions amongst the United States and many countries still remain high. According to an NBC poll done in 2017, 76% of Americans were concerned about the United States entering a major war. This fear has caused unrest in the entire country, and when the United States is on edge, the rest of the world tends to follow suit. If we are to be able to be at peace with the world, we have to stop fearing that what we do not understand or what is different from us. These fears are natural and hard to stop. This is why we continue to have war today in our current situation. Overall, fear leads to war in many different ways, whether that be fear of another country lies affecting how we live, or fear of a weapon that another country has, like the hydrogen bomb. This can also strike fear into any country and lead them to having to fight back to stop the fear that they brought to their country in the first place. Fear is everywhere, and this fear makes our world unstable and always on the verge of breaking. Fear itself, what we fear, like Franklin D. Roosevelt said in his speech I referenced at the beginning of this video. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.